We want to offer up some prayers for you, so hopefully you'll feel better very soon, and you'll be able to join us next week. We hope so. But again, we've been covering. We have started reading from the book of the Proofs of Baha'u'llah's Mission. And last week, there were some high points that I think we need to point out. Number one, it's important that you know that Baha'u'llah was born on November 12th, 1817. He was a member of a noble family in Iran, what at that time was known as Persia. Okay, however, even though he was born to a noble family, he pretty much passed on the chance to just have, an easy life, cushy life. And he got involved in philanthropy. He was very philanthropic to the point that he became known by many as the father of the poor. He lived a life in that he became involved in a movement that began in 1844. And 1844 is really a pivotal year because at that time it was a time of great expectation by people of different faiths who were expecting what we'll just call the return of Jesus or the return of the Messiah. There was great expectation in the Christian community, in the Muslim community, and even other faiths as well. But what we consider that return, because this is what we've been told through the writings of the Bab and Baha'u'llah. The Bab was the forerunner of Baha'u'llah. If you are a Christian tradition, you can think of the Bab as sort of like John the Baptist, who prepared the way for Jesus. The Bab prepared the way for Baha'u'llah and referred to him at that time as him who God will make manifest, or he who God will make manifest. And this was in 1844. As a result of this movement, there was a lot of upheaval. There was a lot of turmoil. And people who believed in the Bab's message, many of them were actually massacred, okay? And there were noted people around the globe at that time who were very much interested in this message coming from the Bab and from Baha'u'llah, people of very diverse backgrounds, very much kind of weighed in on their views of Baha'u'llah. We won't recap that. But in 1852, that is a prominent year because Baha'u'llah was very prominent in defending the cause of the Bab, and because of this, he was arrested. He was arrested and imprisoned in a prison that was called the Siachal, which meant the Black Pit. It was a very vermin-infested prison. He was never charged with anything. But he remained in prison and in captivity in some sort of way for the rest of his life. But in 1852 is when he received his very first glimpse of his mission. And we're going to go ahead and pick it up a little bit before where we left off. I mentioned his reference to the Bab's reference to Baha'u'llah as he whom God will make manifest. Well, this claim had evoked violent hostility from the Muslim clergy because they had taught that the process of divine revelation had actually ended with Muhammad, and that any assertion to the contrary represented apostasy, and that was punishable by death. Well, their denunciation of the Bab had soon enlisted the support of the Persian authorities. Yeah, you've got the government getting involved there. Thousands of followers of the new faith, the faith that the Bab was promoting, had perished in a horrific series of massacres throughout the country. And the Bab was publicly executed on July 9th, 1850. I see Christine Milton is with us. Hi, Christine, how are you? Well, in an age of growing Western involvement in the Orient, these events had aroused interest and compassion in influential European circles. The nobility of the Bab's life and teachings, the heroism of his followers, and the hope for fundamental reform that they had kindled in a darkened land had exerted a powerful attraction for personalities ranging from Ernest Renan and Leo Tolstoy to Sarah Bernhardt and the Count de Gobineau. Now, you might not recognize those names. You probably recognize Tolstoy, but know that they were very noted individuals in that time. We don't have time to cover who they were, but if you look up those names, you'll find that they were from diverse backgrounds and were very well-known individuals in that time. Now, because of his prominence in the defense of the Bab's cause, Baha'u'llah was arrested and brought in chains and on foot to Tehran. And protected in some measure by an impressive personal reputation, he was well known, and also very much loved, and the social position of his family, as well as by protests, which the Babi pogroms, those massacres that I mentioned, had evoked from Western embassies. So a lot of attention was on Baha'u'llah at this time. But Baha'u'llah was not sentenced to death, as influential figures at the royal court were urging. They wanted him dead. Instead, he was cast into the notorious Siyah-Chal. Again, that was known as the Black Pit, which was a deep, vermin-infested dungeon which had been created in one of the city's abandoned reservoirs. No charges were laid, but Baha'u'llah had some 30 companions, and he and those 30 companions, without appeal, were kept immured in the darkest filth of this pit. And they were surrounded by hardened criminals, many of them under sentence of death. Around Baha'u'llah's neck was clamped a heavy chain, so notorious in penal circles that it actually had been given its own name. But when Baha'u'llah did not quickly perish, as had been expected, there was an attempt to poison him. And the marks of the chain were to remain on his body for the rest of his life. So we're going to pick it up from there. And it was in these circumstances, and faced with the prospect of his own imminent death, that Baha'u'llah received the first intimation of his mission. The experience of divine revelation, touched on only at secondhand. You know, for other messengers of God, those things that we know about how they got their message, that they would then be moved to go on and establish a new faith. The accounts that we have of those previous messengers are all secondhand accounts. Okay, so touched on only at secondhand and surviving accounts of the lives of the Buddha and Moses and Jesus Christ and Muhammad is described graphically in Baha'u'llah's own words. In this particular case, Baha'u'llah actually was able to document what he went through when he got the first glimpse of his mission. And these are his words. During the days I lay in the prison of Tehran, though the galling weight of the chains and the stench-filled air allowed me but little sleep, still, in those infrequent moments of slumber, I felt as if something flowed from the crown of my head over my breast, even as a mighty torrent that precipitated itself upon the earth from the summit of a lofty mountain. Every limb of my body would, as a result, be set afire. At such moments, my tongue recited what no man could bear to hear. Now, I mentioned that Baha'u'llah, he lived his life in captivity. He wasn't always in a prison, but he was either in a prison or exiled. He never would find his total freedom for the rest of his life. So eventually, we're going to talk now about the fact that Baha'u'llah was actually exiled. Eventually, still without trial or recourse, Baha'u'llah was released from prison and immediately banished from his native land to the neighboring territory of Iraq, then under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. Now, this expulsion was the beginning of 40 years of exile, imprisonment, and bitter persecution. Well, by 1863, Baha'u'llah concluded that the time had come to begin acquainting some of those around him with the mission which had been entrusted to him in the darkness of the Siyah-Chal. This decision coincided with a new stage in the campaign of opposition to his work. That never really stopped for the rest of his life. There were always dignitaries or government officials or religious officials that were opposed to his work. This decision coincided with a new stage in the campaign of opposition to his work, which had been relentlessly pursued by the Shia Muslim clergy and representatives of the Persian government. Fearing that the acclaim which Baha'u'llah was beginning to enjoy among influential Persian visitors to Iraq would reignite popular enthusiasm in Persia, the officials were afraid that this would really catch on. They feared that it would reignite popular enthusiasm in Persia. So the Shah's government pressed the Ottoman authorities to remove Baha'u'llah far from the borders. They just wanted to be rid of him, far from the borders and into the interior of the Ottoman Empire. Hang on for a second. I see some things popping up on our Facebook stream. Let's see. Hello, Jeremiah. How you doing? And let's see. That's Shayla. How you doing? I'm sorry. Yeah, Shayla. And yeah, good to see all of you here. Well, eventually, the Turkish government acceded to these pressures and invited the exile as its guest, to make his residence in the capital of Constantinople. I think I started out too far back. Well, despite the courteous terms in which this message was couched, it sounded like an invitation, but the intention was clearly to require compliance. This was not, you have a choice. This was not an option. This is what he had to do. Well, in late 1863, on the eve of his departure from Constantinople, Baha'u'llah called together individuals among his companions in a garden to which was later given the name Rizwan, and Rizwan means paradise. And he confided the central fact of his mission. This is where he started telling his followers that he indeed was the messenger from God. Over the next 4 years, although no open announcement was considered timely, the hearers of Baha'u'llah's message shared with trusted friends the news that the Bab's promises had been fulfilled and that the day of God had dawned. The conditions surrounding Baha'u'llah's departure from Baghdad provided a dramatic demonstration of the potency of these principles. In only a few years, a band of foreign exiles whose arrival in the area had aroused suspicion and aversion on the part of their neighbors had now become one of the most respected and influential segments of the population. They supported themselves. That was a question I always had about, people could just pick up and move. How did they support themselves? Well, they supported themselves through flourishing businesses. As a group, they were admired for their generosity and the integrity of their conduct. The lurid allegations of religious fanaticism and violence that were so much spread by Persian consular officials and members of the Shia Muslim clergy had ceased to have any effect on the public mind. And by May 3rd, 1863, when Baha'u'llah rode out of Baghdad, accompanied by his family and those of his companions and servants who had been chosen to accompany him to Constantinople, Baha'u'llah had become an immensely popular and cherished figure. So he, by this time, even though he'd been banished, he was again gathering followers, and he was well known. He'd become a well-known figure. I lost my place there one moment. In the days immediately preceding the leave taking, a stream of notables, including the governor of the province himself, came to the garden where he had temporarily taken up residence, many of them from great distances in order to pay their respects. Eyewitnesses to the departure had described in moving terms the acclaim that greeted Baha'u'llah, the tears of many of the onlookers and concern of the Ottoman authorities and civil officials to do their visitor honor. So many came to wish Baha'u'llah well at this particular time. Well, soon after the exiles' arrival in Constantinople, things seemed really great, didn't they? But soon after the exiles' arrival in Constantinople, it became apparent that the honors showered upon Baha'u'llah during his journey from Baghdad had represented only a brief interlude. When I read this, I think about when Jesus, on what Christians call Palm Sunday, when Jesus came riding on a donkey and people were waving palm fronds and so forth. And it was actually a time that preceded his crucifixion. His journey, it became apparent that the honors showered upon Baha'u'llah during his journey from Baghdad had represented only a brief interlude. The Ottoman authorities' decision to move him and his companions to the capital of the empire rather than to some remote province deepened the alarm among the representatives of the Persian government. Fearing that the developments in Baghdad would be repeated, the Persian ambassador pressed insistently for the dispatch of the exiles to some more distant part of the empire. Again, they just wanted him gone. The place chosen for his final banishment was the grim fortress town of Acca. And for those of you, again, from the Christian tradition, you can read, when you read in the Bible and you read about the Valley of Acre, A-C-R-E, this is a reference to that. The place chosen for his final banishment was the grim fortress town of Acca on the coast of the Holy Land, notorious throughout the empire for the foulness of its climate and the prevalence of many diseases. Acca was a penal colony used by the Ottoman state for the incarceration of dangerous criminals who could be expected not to survive too long their imprisonment there. Baha'u'llah arrived in August of 1868 at this prison of Acca. And when he arrived, the members of his family and a company of his followers who had been exiled with him were to experience 2 years of suffering and abuse within the fortress itself, and then be confined under house arrest to a nearby building owned by a local merchant. Things may have gotten better, but Baha'u'llah still, again, had not regained his freedom. For a long time, the exiles were shunned by the superstitious local populace who had been warned in public sermons against the God of the Persians. That's how they referred to him, apparently. Against the God of the Persians, who was depicted as an enemy of the public order, and the purveyor of blasphemous and immoral ideas. Several members of the small group of exiles died of the privations and other conditions to which they were subjected. And right now, I think it'd be a good time to throw a song in here. Right now, I'm really missing Daryl. But you've heard it, if you've been with us before, you may have heard us do this song called A Light Shining in Acca. And this song is a reference to that time when Baha'u'llah was in the prison of Acca. And it is, there's a little story behind this song. There's a local, wonderful woman who lives here in the Tampa Bay area. Her name is Ingrid. And I'll never forget when she told me the story of Acca. I was still relatively new as a Baha'i, and she told me the story of Acca where Baha'u'llah was in prison. Well, there were followers of Baha'u'llah that would travel long distances to see him, but he was not able to come out to see them. But what he would do is, in this prison, he would often hang a handkerchief or a kerchief from the window of his prison cell, and they would know he was there. And just to get a glimpse of that, people would travel many, many miles by foot. But this song is called A Light Shining in Acca. There was a light shining in Acca. There was a light. It shone all around. A new revelation of God's loving guidance. One holy light, it lit up the night, the word streaming down. So many souls sharing a journey. So many souls seeking the light. Hearing a voice whispering inside them, heeding the call, risking their all to do what was right. But so many tried to stop it from glowing. So many tried to put out that fire. But lovers of truth in this new dispensation knew they had found God's love come down, their heart's desire. And there was a light shining in Akka. There was a light, it shone all around. A new revelation of God's loving guidance. One holy light lit up the night, the word streaming down. One prison cell made oh so holy. God's revelation there in the dark. This Son of Truth, this blessed beauty, bringing God's love from up above into our hearts. And there was a light shining in our God. There was a light, it shone all around. A new revelation of God's loving guidance. One holy light, it lit up the night, the word streaming down. One holy light lit up the night, the word streaming down. One holy light, it lit up the night, the word streaming down. Light shining in Akka. Well, to continue, we're going to go ahead and you know something now about Baha'u'llah and what he went through, and the fact that even though he had done no harm to anyone, had done no wrong, well, he ended up imprisoned and exiled, just for teaching the word of God. It doesn't always sit well when a messenger of God comes and starts teaching what is seen often as a threat. Because it's a new day. Each time that a messenger of God comes, it's a new day. It's a new day. And this was a new day. Well, now we're going to go ahead and read about Baha'u'llah's teachings for humanity. You need to understand that any messenger of God, when they come and start with their teachings, it's a validation of old teachings, but sometimes it's also an abrogation of old teachings if they no longer serve the needs of the people in that day. And so they validate previous messengers. They also abrogate certain social laws, but they also present new teachings. So let's read about Baha'u'llah's teachings for humanity. Central to Baha'u'llah's teachings is an exposition of the great themes which have preoccupied religious thinkers throughout the ages. God, the role of revelation in history, the relationship of the world's religious systems to one another, the meaning of faith, and the basis of moral authority in the organization of human society. Passages in these texts from Baha'u'llah speak intimately of his own spiritual experience, of his response to the divine summons which he had received, and of the dialogue with the Spirit of God, which lay at the heart of his mission. Religious history has never before offered the inquirer the opportunity for so candid an encounter with the phenomenon of divine revelation. Well, in June of 1877, Baha'u'llah at last emerged from the strict confinement of the prison city of Akka, and he moved with his family to Mazra'i, a small estate a few miles north of the city. After a brief 2-year stay at Mazra'i, Baha'u'llah moved to Baji, a large mansion surrounded by gardens, which his son Abdul Baha had rented for him and the members of his extended family. The remaining 12 years of Baha'u'llah's life were devoted to his writings on a wide range of spiritual and social issues, and to receiving a stream of Baha'i pilgrims who made their way with great difficulty from Persia and other lands. Throughout the Near and Middle East, the nucleus of a community life was beginning to take shape among those who had accepted the message of Baha'u'llah. For its guidance, Baha'u'llah had revealed a system of laws and institutions designed to give practical effect to the principles of his writings. Authority was vested in councils, democratically elected by the whole community. Provisions were made to exclude the possibility of a clerical elite arising. You know what? I'm going to read that again. This is pretty important. What I think of when I read this, and this is not about me, again, I'm not a minister, I'm not an authority, I'm just a Baha'i, and we've all been admonished to teach the word of Baha'u'llah. But there is this phrase from the Christian writings, and the government shall be upon his shoulders. I'm going to read that again. For its guidance, Baha'u'llah had revealed a system of laws and institutions designed to give practical effect to the principles of his writings. Authority was vested in councils democratically elected by the whole community. Provisions were made to exclude the possibility of a clerical elite arising, and principles of consultation and group decision-making were established. At the heart of this system was what Baha'u'llah termed a new covenant between God and humankind. The distinguishing feature of humanity's coming of age is that for the first time in history, well, you know what? I probably need to talk about that phrase, the humanity's coming of age. This is what we're told in the writings of Baha'u'llah, that in this age, humanity reaches spiritual maturity, or the beginnings, shall we say, of spiritual maturity, humanity's coming of age. The distinguishing feature of humanity's coming of age is that for the first time in history, the entire human race is consciously involved, however dimly, in the awareness of its own oneness and of the earth as a single homeland. This is part of the message that Baha'u'llah teaches and is ushering in. In the awareness of its own oneness and of the earth as a single homeland. This awakening opens the way to a new relationship between God and humankind. As the peoples of the world embrace the spiritual authority inherent in the guidance of the revelation of God for this age, Baha'u'llah said they will find in themselves a moral empowerment which human effort alone has proven incapable of generating. Now, I think at this time we need to point out that this is a process, and quite frankly, a very long process. And yet we're starting to see, or in the past, century and a half, glimmers of exactly what Baha'u'llah is talking about. I'll read that once again. As the peoples of the world embrace the spiritual authority inherent in the guidance of the revelation of God for this age. Baha'u'llah said, they will find in themselves a moral empowerment which human effort alone has proven incapable of generating. A new race of men will emerge as the result of this relationship. And the work of building a global civilization will begin. I'm going to read that again. A new race of men will emerge as a result of this relationship, and the work of building a global civilization will begin. Now you got to remember, when this word is being revealed, it's back in the 1800s. The mission of the Baha'i community is to demonstrate the efficacy of this covenant in healing the ills that divide the human race. And if you ask most people why they're Baha'is, somewhere in their response, if they actually give you a response, somewhere in their response, you will hear glimpses or glimmers or mentions of this thing about oneness, the oneness of mankind, the oneness of faith, the oneness of humanity, and the oneness of God. Well, to continue, Baha'u'llah died at Baji on May 29th, 1892, in his 75th year. He lived to be 75. At the time of his passing, the cause entrusted to him 40 years earlier in the darkness of Tehran's Black Pit was poised to break free of the Islamic lands where it had taken shape, and to establish itself first across America and Europe, and then throughout the world. In doing so, it would itself become a vindication of the promise of the new covenant between God and mankind. For alone of all the world's independent religions, the Baha'i faith and its community of believers were to pass successfully through the critical first century of their existence with their unity firmly intact. A Baha'i is a Baha'i is a Baha'i. There are no sects. There are no, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh boy, there's another word that pretty much means the same thing, but is a different term for, denominations. No sects or denominations. You're a Baha'i. For alone of all the world's independent religions, the Baha'i faith and its community of believers were to pass successfully through the critical first century of their existence with their unity firmly intact, undamaged by the age-old blight of schism and faction. Their experience offers compelling evidence for Baha'u'llah's assurance that the human race in all its diversity can learn to live and work as one people in a common global homeland. So, for anyone who's wondering or has wondered in the past, who is Baha'u'llah? What are Baha'is? Who are Baha'is? Well, Baha'is, of course, are followers of the message of Baha'u'llah. You'll find them all over the globe. Even if you've never heard of the Baha'i faith, this is your first time, you might be surprised that you might find that you live very near Baha'is. The Baha'i faith is the second most widespread religion on earth. Now, this doesn't mean that it's the second most populous religion. We're not talking numbers here, but we're talking about in places where followers of Baha'u'llah live. Second most widespread religion on earth. And so it has become entrenched in many, many different places. And so this is why we feel it is important to share why do we see Baha'u'llah as a messenger of God? Why do we see him as well as we refer to all the prophets of God as manifestations of God, all the major prophets anyway as manifestations of God? And we see Baha'u'llah as simply the latest manifestation of God. You will hear other ways of referring to him, but when you hear a messenger of God, we see Baha'u'llah and Jesus Christ and the Buddha and Krishna and Muhammad, and there are others all the way back to what is called the beginning of, or the Adamic cycle, even Adam, as manifestations of God. Next week, hopefully we'll have Daryl, and I don't know if Nina will be able to join us, but we're going to be looking at the next chapter in this text, which is an important precept in the Baha'i faith. It's called the independent investigation of truth. Baha'is, we're told we're not supposed to be proselytizing. We teach the word, but we're not supposed to try and push people into joining the faith, because what we are always encouraged to do and encouraged to tell others is to investigate for yourself. Investigate for yourself. And so we'll be talking about that next week when we talk about the independent investigation of truth, because truth is truth. And if you independently investigate, it will not be, at least the chance of you being fooled into something that really doesn't, that is not based on truth, is greatly lessened, shall we say. There's less chance of that. At this time, what we're going to do is go ahead and open up for prayers. And we see we've got some other people who have joined us since we began. Behzad is with us, and let's see, Hushang is with us. And we're glad to see all of you. But as usual, we're glad last week Camby's couldn't be with us. He was not feeling well. He looks like he's good and healthy today. And so we're going to go ahead and start and have, at this time, beginning with prayers. Anyone who wants to offer up a prayer or a song or a reading of your own choosing. And we always like to start with our Camby's moment. So Camby's, do you have something for us today?
Sure.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and please.
ای متوجه الله دیده به ملکوت غیب جبروت باز کن و به این مناجات آغاز نیاز کن. که ای مهربان تو ست کن و بپوش خطا از ما، عطا از تو جفا از ما، وفا از تو گناه از ما، پناه از تو بیماری از ما، شفا از تو بپوش و بیاموز، وفا کن پناه ده شفا بخش اینه.
Thank you, Camby's. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to share?
I'd like to say a healing prayer for Jim Barnes, who's having back surgery this week.
Ah, yes.
Thy name is my healing, O my God, and remembrance of thee is my remedy. Nearness to thee is my hope, and love for thee is my companion. Thy mercy to me is my healing and my succor in both this world and the world to come. Thou verily art the all-bountiful, the all-knowing, the all-wise.
Thank you, Farah. Is there anyone else who might like to share?
Allah Park, can I say a prayer?
Please, please.
Oh Allah, بگذار این مشتاقان آشفته روی تو و سرگشته کوی تو